Hello, everybody. Today we are going to be talking about teaching and learning art online and discussing all of the pros and cons. If you would like to grow as an artist and you can't afford an art class, we've got everything you need here at Art Prof, critiques, tutorials, and professional development. For the purposes of today's stream, we will be talking about learning and teaching online, both in a school setting or in a situation like Art Prof. I know a lot of you here are learning online, and most likely you are doing it in more than one place on YouTube in school, or maybe you're a teacher. And I just want to talk about the collective experience, because the answer to a lot of what we're going to talk about today is it depends on the situation, on the teacher, on the school, on the format. And I think a lot of people have had time to really mull over this over the past year because of the whole coronavirus situation. So tell me in the chat. I'm going to assume that most people have done some form of in-person schooling somewhere, but I'd like to hear, where have you learned or taught online? Was it in public school? Was it on YouTube? Was it in college? Was it a continuing education class? I would love to hear what is the context, because what I'm seeing now is that a lot of places are starting to completely rethink their curriculum. And honestly, art education, it's not going to be the same, even when the coronavirus situation has been resolved. I think a lot of places are starting to realize, wow, there really is potential in online teaching. And there are definitely advantages to online teaching that don't exist with in-person teaching. And I have really a unique experience because I was a brick and mortar teacher in the classroom at RISD for over a decade. And that was my primary form of teaching. I always thought of Art Prof, before I went full-time on Art Prof, is always being a supplement. I always thought, okay, this will never replace in-person teaching for me. And in-person teaching will always be icing on the cake. It'll just be an extra thing that I do. However, I've completely changed my mind about that, because my assumption when I was a brick and mortar classroom teacher was that in-person was inherently better. It just was always going to be better. There was stuff you could do online, but there was definitely a limit to what you could do. And the most ideal situation was in person. I've changed my mind about that. Can you believe it? I know. I cannot believe these words are coming out of my mouth, because I'm still pro art school. I still think if you can go, that's great. But I'm starting to think it's not as necessary, which I, again, cannot believe that I'm saying that. But it's such a different world now. I think when I went to art school, there was no YouTube. Like, people did not have all of these opportunities to learn and teach. And the landscape is just so completely different. So we have a lot of people from many different situations. Jessica says, I dropped out of online community college because I felt like I wasn't really learning. It's hard to do art school online. Daciana says YouTube. Artist Zena says adjunct faculty teaching and learning. And Vanessa says, started teaching Portuguese to foreigners back in 2007, but only private classes. After the pandemic, I taught online for a private school. Now I do 100% teaching private online. And Dara says, my art school is brick and mortar with an online component. I did it online, but technology online resources weren't what they are today. That is true, although I will say one of the complications of the technology is that it is changing so fast. There's another better option. And I think it's a struggle for teachers to say, hey, do I stick with the platform that I know well, or do I bother to learn something new that is maybe a little bit more up to date? It's a lot to be processing. And Mahika says, Art Prof has been a better art education resource for me than in learning. Thank you very much, Mahika. And Shasta says, I've been learning online through YouTube, Creative Bug, and the library. And W315 says, how do you make an exhibition and also share my research? Probably Google Docs. Oh, there are so many ways. And I'll tell you guys, so much of what you choose to do tech-wise when you teach or learn online really has to do with your audience, because I've been doing a lot of faculty training for colleges and school districts. And depending on the situation, I sometimes will say to them, you know what? I personally think Discord is the best chat, but for certain demographics or places, it doesn't make sense. Or there's some schools that completely ban it entirely and they make you use Microsoft Teams, which in my opinion is just the worst thing. I hate Microsoft Teams. Actually, tell me which platforms you guys really don't like. Like, I hate Microsoft Teams. I also am not a fan of Zoom. There's just a lot of platforms that people are like forced to use that I just think are the worst. And because people have big issues or hangups about certain things, they refuse to acknowledge another platform. People have very strong feelings about platforms, which is making it even more complicated. Jessica says, do you think teaching at RISD shaped Art Prof at all, as in the curriculum? Oh, it's everything. I mean, I based Art Prof entirely on the content that I teach at RISD. It's the same. The content is exactly the same, but the thing that's different is the delivery and also the audience. So the way I would put it, it's almost like teaching Russian for 14 years and then being told, oh, sorry, you got to teach in Turkish now. And so you're talking about the same thing, but the thing is the way you actually express it, the way you put it down on paper is completely different. All right, let's dig into what I think are some of the pros, because you know something? Since I went full-time on Art Prof, and this is still an experiment. I mean, I really hope we can get Art Prof to the point where I can do this 100% and I'll have to go back to university teaching, because I just love what we're doing so much here, but it's a little precarious right now in terms of us being financially stable and stuff like that, but I'm doing the best I can. But I actually think the most critical thing about online learning is access. That is the difference. Because sure, it's a little bit different when you're a public school teacher and you're teaching the 6th grade class and you're only going to teach those kids. But when you're teaching on an online course, like on Skillshare or here at Art Prof or something like that, it's a completely different story. And I realized teaching through Art Prof that there are all these people who are getting art education now because they have access. And for a lot of people, it's like you either have that access or you don't. And a lot of people say to me, listen, if it weren't for Art Prof, I just wouldn't do it. It just would not be a part of my life, because art classes are not cheap most of the time. And another issue is that you have people that have disabilities, people that have medical conditions, people who have chronic illness, who for one reason or another cannot take a weekly art class and enroll in a degree program. And it's like, if you think about it that way, that population of people, they're never going to be able to take an art class. So online learning is the only option for them. And I just think that's really, really important. And that's why Art Prof has always been free. We don't have a paywall. It's a crappy business model for us because it's really hard to sustain, but it's always been a huge part of our priority here in terms of our mission. Joe says, I don't know how you do it. I tried teaching piano online once. It was more exhausting than in person. Sure, that is absolutely one of the cons for teachers. The thing about teaching online is a huge amount of prep work. Because the thing is, when I taught in person, if I was doing a drawing class and my students were not absorbing the lesson, I was like, oh, dude, you guys need another lecture. You need another demo. I could just spur of the moment say, hey, everybody come over here. I got to show you how to do this. And that was no problem. I can't do that when I teach online. Like if I'm streaming live right now and I realize, oh man, I really need to tell you guys about this pectoralis major on Michael Fassbender's torso. I can't just find a photo. Well, I can, but it would take more time away from valuable class time that would be wasted. And so that's not a good use of my time. So what happens with a lot of teachers, it's a huge amount of prep time. There's not a lot of room for spontaneity, which I don't think is a good thing in terms of teaching online, because you never know. I've been doing this for so many years, and I always think, oh, I've seen it all. I have not. Every single time I think I've seen it all, somebody else does something, and it's wonderful. I mean, I just love that so much. Sai says, one thing I absolutely despise in online school is the lack of materials that one can use. It feels like all the money given is a waste, especially when I take super hands-on subjects. That I will say, that's the tragedy of online learning, is access to materials is very hard. Because when I was teaching at RISD, I could be so hardcore with the students about get that eraser. And it was easy because we had the RISD store. RISD store was like 10 feet away. And so it was very easy for students to go and get the materials that they wanted. And that was fine. But online, I can't assume that anybody has anything. And I'll tell you, it does limit what I can teach online. I have to either come up with substitutions, or I can't require certain things. And there are certain processes, like especially sculpture, you just cannot do them online. Like you're not going to teach glass blowing. You're never going to teach a casting class. I've done some sculpt-alongs here that a lot of you have participated in, but I do have to change the way I teach it, because I cannot assume that everybody has the exact same clay, everybody has Murphy's oil soap, everybody has sodium silicate. Like those are not things I can assume. And so you do sometimes have to settle for a more simplified version that is not as specific and just sometimes not as demanding in terms of permanent or archival supplies. That is a sacrifice that you do have to make. Vanessa says, I'm so one of those people who would never, ever had this opportunity if not for Art Prof. Grateful forever. Yeah, tell me in the chat, how many of you guys here, if there was no Art Prof, what would be your option for learning art? Would it be in class? Would it just be other YouTube channels? Would you take a continuing education class? Let me know, because I think that's so interesting to hear about the different levels of access that people have, because as we know, it is not remotely equal, and it really depends on where you are. And Lisa H says, the online commute is wonderful. I love it. Well, my situation's so specific because I was living in Boston and commuting an hour to RISD, and it's a long day. I mean, I used to teach drawing classes at RISD that were 7.5 hours long. And I had days where I would leave in the morning in the dark, and I would come home in the dark. That's what it was in the winter. And that's a little exhausting to say. I mean, I would just come home and I would collapse at the end of a RISD day, and I just would know that nothing else could happen that particular day. Dara says, I sometimes think the access to resource issues forces us to become creative problem solvers instead of artistic clones. That's a great point. You know something? I had a friend who was in graduate school, and she'd always come into the classroom with all this stuff, pieces of wood and just random objects. And I would always say to her, where'd you get that? And she'd say, the garbage. I mean, granted, this was in New York City. I mean, you could find anything on the street in New York City. And it goes to show how resourceful she was, because it's true. You cannot always rely that you're going to be able to afford Ashley Isles woodcut tools that I think in the 2000s, I bought mine and they were $35 a tool. And you needed 7 of them or so to actually be able to function. And not everybody is ever going to have access to those tools. And so I do think from a teaching point of view, you could argue that maybe it's not such a bad thing that I don't require such specific supplies anymore, because that's the other issues. You feel bad because at art school, you'd have kids on scholarship and they wouldn't be able to purchase the supplies. And I would always make accommodations for those students. Like I would say, that's okay, you can do this instead. But in general, what I did expect for students at RISD was to buy the supply list. That's what is very, very challenging. W315 says, before art prof, I always had vague plans to sit in on art classes at university as a community listener, but never got around to it. You know, I'm wondering, all of you, if maybe the reason you're all here is because of the frequency and consistency of our content that we stream every day. You don't have to think about it. You just know we're here. We're here pretty much at the same time, 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern on the weekends, 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern on weekdays. I wonder if that's a part of it, because when you study in school, it is fragmented, because you're taking a math class, you're taking art, you're taking history, and there isn't that continuity that I think you can get online. And I honestly think what we've built here is easier than being, say, a private school art teacher, because you know what's awesome? This is so terrible. I do not miss grading. I do not miss taking attendance. And honestly, this community, it's all the best students, because nobody has to come here. There's no prerequisite class. There's no credit that they're trying to fulfill. They're not trying to do it for, like, everybody is here. I'm going to assume everybody who's here is here because they want to be. And that is such a big difference, because when I was teaching in the brick and mortar classroom, I would get complaints at the end of the semester. Honestly, I was expecting an A and you gave me an A minus. And I was like, are you kidding? Do you know how hard it is to get an A in my class? Like, you should be very happy you got an A minus. Or I'd have students who just chronic issues with attendance. And then because I had to do grades, I had to stay on top of that. And then you have to keep documentation, because you have to be able to prove later on that a student did a certain thing. And I've been in meetings with department heads where a student accused me of things, and I just don't miss any of that. And there's something really is phenomenal about this group of people who want to be here. And then if you can't stay, you just leave and nobody cares. And if you come late, nobody cares. It's kind of like amazing. And let's see what else. Wow, people have a lot to say in the chat. I hope I can keep up with you guys here. Shasta says, after the wet charcoal draw along accessible enough already, I found charcoal in a fire pit and cardboard in a recycle bin. Can happily recommend. Yeah, it's like being forced to do that problem solving is really an amazing thing. Walberty says the consistency and quantity is a great advantage. Also, the ability to see the streams again and watch even when you miss the streams. That is such a big game changer. I mean, I think the most ideal situation, which honestly I don't think is ever going to happen, is I did it once. One summer I did this. Never again. It's never going to happen again. But I taught at the RISD pre-college program, and I taught in that program for years and years and years. And so I knew the program inside out. And I always had these like classic projects. I did them every single summer, and I would always switch it up. So every summer there'd be like at least one wild card project that I could experiment with. Okay. And so one of my classic projects was this lotus fold meandering book. You can find it on our YouTube channel under 3D art playlists. And it's a pretty simple bookbinding fold, but it's specific. I mean, for those of you who have ever made a handmade book, a lot can go wrong. Like, even if you're taking very extensive notes and you're paying attention, there's like something like you forgot to turn the corner or something like that. And so what I did for that class, we had an in-person demo. I worked with them in class, hands-on, and we did these like dummy books. And then I sent them home and I said, okay, make the book on your own and bring it to class on Monday. But the difference is I sent them home with the tutorial, the one that's here on our YouTube channel. And people were just so thrilled to be able to go back to that tutorial, rewind, revisit. They said it was just the biggest difference in the world. And so ideally, that's what you want. It's like the in-person with a really well-produced tutorial that took like 20 hours to produce. But of course, nobody's going to be able to do that unless I go back and have no time for anything. So I think that was really ideal. I also want to give a shout out to Meisuko. Thank you so much for your support, who says, Art Prof has been the best online learning that I've ever experienced in any subject matter. Wow, that is high praise. Thank you so much for being part of this community. And I will tell you guys that you are 60% of the reason why our community works so well. I mean, it's one thing for me and the teaching artist to show up and teach you guys stuff, but I really do think that one of the main reasons people stick around here is because of the community. I mean, don't you guys feel like you learn just as much from each other as you do from us? Like, tell me in the chat, who has had an experience here on the live stream or in the Discord, somebody said something that maybe, wow, that crystallized that concept for you. Or maybe you were in the post live stream chat and we're all posting the draw along pieces and you saw this person's drawing and went, whoa, I want to try that. That is really cool. Or somebody said this to me the other day, which I kind of love. They said, you know something? Whenever I post my stuff in the Discord, anywhere, critique channels, whatever, there's always somebody better than me. And you might think, oh, that's very discouraging. But you know what they also said? They said, there's always someone worse than me. And I loved that so much because it's like you got to have both sides of the equation. You can't always feel like you're the best. You're not going to learn. On the other hand, you don't always want to feel like you're the worst because that's really, really discouraging. And so that's the other thing is because we have an audience that is so many people from all over the world of all different ages, you do see that range. And I think oftentimes, especially at these like elite institutions, you're not going to get that so much. It's a very specific, smaller demographic that you're not going to get online. I mean, online, oh my God, I've talked to people in Nigeria. I've talked to people in Mexico and China and Australia. I mean, everywhere. I've talked to people like I have to look up the name of the country. I know, isn't that terrible? I can't believe that. I really should know, but sometimes it's a very obscure place and I've never heard of it before. I'm going to give a shout out to Chemical for You. Thank you so much for the super sticker. And when you guys contribute, you are helping somebody who can't get an art class, who cannot pay for that. That's where that budget is going to. And Ayane says, I agree. I do feel like everyone feeds knowledge to each other. We get many perspectives versus a few. My Hika says, oh my God, the critiques and support from the community is something I'd never imagined when I started out. Yeah, and you get that in person as well, for sure. It's just the range is just, oh my God, infinitely bigger online. And, you know, it's actually really cool because we have lots of students, like people who are in middle school or high school, and then we have a lot of people who are, you know, in their 80s and their 60s. We have all ages, okay? And what is so cool about that, actually, I love these. You guys could tell me if you've seen this too, where somebody in high school will come in and they'll talk about, oh, I'm so stressed out about my grades and I'm feeling all this pressure and stuff. And then you have these older people who come in and are like, it's going to be okay. Here's what happened to me. And I love that mentorship because you know something? When I was in art school and I was struggling with different things, it's so helpful to talk to somebody who's so much older than you and who's not your parents. It really, really helps. Like, tell me, have any of you people in high school or college gotten help from a much older person in Discord and like gotten perspective? Like, I get, like, I love reading the comments, like, especially in artist wellness and the Discord is so lovely to hear all those different experiences. Because if you're in high school, chances are you aren't interacting with that many adults who are much older than you, who are not your parents. I mean, it's mostly teachers and parents. You're not really interacting with somebody who, you know, your grade's not on the line or anything like that. I'm going to say thank you so much to Luis and also RB Dick for the super stickers. We greatly appreciate your support. W315 says, in Discord this morning, we've been trading tips on Prismacolors and pencil sharpening and egg oil emulsions and having bad drawing days. Also, we're such nerds. Oh my God, is this just the dorkiest? I love it. I love that we can talk about, I don't even know what egg oil emulsions is. It's like so funny. Vanessa says, I hope I can ease some kids' hearts over something I'm already used to. The way they help me with my techniques when I ask for feedback, they are way ahead of me in terms of the skills. That happens too. Yeah, some of you high school students, you guys are rocking it, you know? And it's like, I have people who are much older and they say, oh my God, these kids are just hitting it out of the park. I'm so much older. I have a quarter the skill that they have. So I think that it goes both ways. Like, a lot of this is mutual exchanges that people are really experiencing in the Discord. It's absolutely phenomenal. So another thing I would say too about learning online is it really forces you to learn the online skills, because it was a wake-up call for academia. I mean, there are professors, not going to name any names, who you would email them and get nothing. And you cannot do that when you teach online. And I think just people had to really up their game in terms of how to communicate online. And it's hard. It's a skill. Learning how to write an email to somebody that's appropriate for your relationship with them is hard. Because, you know, something I discovered when I started teaching at RISD, I would have students that would email me now and then about certain things. And it's so out of control. When I first started teaching, because I didn't know any better, I had email rules. Like, I was like, here are the rules for how you may email me and what you may not email to me, because I would get these people who would treat me like an ER doctor. Like, I get these emails at like 2 a.m. on Saturday, like, help me with this. And I'm like, I'm not going to see you till Wednesday. Like, I'm not going to reply on a Saturday. And so, like, understanding professional boundaries, when you can email people, what's appropriate to contact, who do you follow on social media. And actually, I did have somebody who graduated last year, and they said to me, you know something? I was graduating that semester, and because we were learning online, I did start following people on social media. I did start setting up those online contacts. And if we hadn't taught online that semester, I don't think I would have done that. And I would have been way far behind. It would have taken me much longer to establish those online connections if we hadn't started doing that. Photographing your artwork. I mean, I think teachers discovered really quickly, wow, a lot of students do not know how to photograph their artwork well. It's hard. I mean, you think, it's not a big deal, just snap a picture. It is. It is hard to take photos of artwork. I mean, it's really, really hard. And people just do not understand that. Elizabeth Byers, thank you so much for the super chat. This channel made my life in lockdown possible. A lot of people have told me that. A lot of people have said to me that we were one of the few consistent, reliable things that they could really come to depend upon during the pandemic, because everything was just, oh my God, we all had the rug pulled out from underneath us. Depending on your situation, it was very hard and still is very hard for many, many people. RB Dick says, I got from my art classmates to feel like I matter as a person and in life too. Absolutely. And Elizabeth says, my life plan since 35 was to work 25 years, get my pension, and be a full-time artist. And you know something? That's a very common experience. Actually, tell me in the chat, who here had a similar thing? Some people, they work in another field and then they retire and they do that. I have a friend who was a physics professor for many years. Now she's a full-time photographer. Or other people in a different situation where, like, I talked to somebody yesterday in the Discord who said they're a full-time engineer, but that they spend every minute they can painting, which I think is amazing. I don't feel like I have that space for that. So yeah. Yoel says, yes, I have older tech, so photos of art is hard. Yeah, even with the accessibility to smartphones now, it's still not an easy thing. And if you do want to have a career in art, which is generally the case for people who go to art school, you got to learn that stuff. And so a lot of the RISI students that I talked to who did that one semester, well, last year as well, a lot of them said to me, they were like, wow, I really had to learn this stuff. And if it wasn't for the online learning, I probably would not have bothered to learn those skills until I had graduated. And it's not that it's too late, but it's takes longer. And when you're just getting to school, you're trying to jump, it just takes forever and ever and ever. So one of the professors I talked to, I mean, she had such a great attitude about the whole thing. She said, listen, we're in lockdown. What can you work on? Yes, there's a limit to what you can do, but you can work on your website. You can work on photographs. You can work on building your social media. Those are all things that you can do. And so I think what we have found is that for a lot of artists, what we choose to do is not necessarily dictated by what we want to do. I mean, I was telling somebody the other day that I used to be a hardcore oil painter. And I was like, painting is my thing. I'm going to get an MFA in painting. I'm going to do all these things. But when I got pregnant with my first kid, I was very paranoid about it. I didn't want to be around any chemicals. I didn't want to risk anything. And so I stopped painting, which you would think, oh my God, that's terrible. Painting is what you really wanted to do. But what I ended up doing was I started drawing with crayon, because I'd done crayon drawings before, but I got so into the crayon drawings and etching ink that I never went back to painting. Isn't that strange? Like, you would think, okay, popped out my kids, I could go back. I never did, because I was so excited about the crayon drawings. And so if I hadn't had that limitation of not being able to paint, I never would have done those crayon drawings. So I think sometimes it feels like, oh gosh, I'm being held back. But sometimes that is extremely helpful. Soyton Lee says, I had planned to wait till retirement to do art. I ended up not being able to wait. Well, we're so glad that you're here with us. Let's see. Adi Saxena says, doctor to artist. W315 says, I will be arting after retirement. Looks like you're arting a lot right now. Michael Billington says, ex-army, now practicing art. And I also want to say thank you so much to Pritzy for the super sticker. Greatly appreciate your support so much. Dara says, I love that Art Prof has the business and professional development side of things. I think a lot of art schools that expect you to be a successful professional totally ignore that part, which is bonkers. It is bonkers. You know why? Because Lauren and I recently did that stream, the business curriculum for self-taught artists. And we were explaining that, you know something, I think 70% of our time is on the business stuff. And that's alarming, because if only 30% of your time is producing content and you're not being taught how to do the other 70%, that's a major issue. And I used to excuse it by saying, oh yeah, but everybody's career is different. And how can we expect art schools to fill? I'm like, come on, everybody needs a website. Everybody needs to know how to send an invoice, how to write an email that's not rude. I mean, those are all like fundamental things. And that's what we do cover in this curriculum, is stuff that you have to do no matter who you are, no matter what the field is. That is very, very important. Now, a con of teaching online, and this is the one that really I have a tough time with, is not seeing the art in real life. That is very hard for me because at RISD, I got to see everything in real life. In fact, I never saw. In fact, I had a role because I had students who'd always say, "Oh, I missed class. Can I email you my thumbnails to get feedback?" And I had this like hardcore, no, you may not do that. And now that I think about it, I'm like, that was dumb. I really should have just said fine. But we were so, of course, fixated on the in-person experience. And that's again why I didn't want students emailing me about long, complicated questions, because I said, listen, if it can wait till next week, I'd much rather talk to you in person because so much is misinterpreted online. But that's the other thing. It's like, that's a skill. It's like learning how to communicate online in a way that is kind, that is respectful, that is accurate to what you're trying to say. Because I actually had this one time, I was teaching at the School and Museum of Fine Arts, and I had the student write me this very angry email. It was long. It was like 4 paragraphs long. It was like, you don't understand me, and you are so threatening, and I feel so attacked in your class. And it was on and on and on. And I felt terrible about it. So I emailed the student back and I said, well, why don't we have a meeting? Let's just talk about it. And then we had the meeting and we sat down and I said, okay, well, I'd really like to discuss this with you. And they said, oh, no, it's fine. It's fine. I was like, really? It didn't sound fine in the email. And they were like, no, I'm good. And I was so weirded out by that because I was like, this is almost like a different person I'm talking to. So in some ways, it felt easier when I was in person to say, let's just not even do that messaging. I would say to students like, hey, if you want to just ask me, is it okay if I do this? That's fine. I just didn't want to have like conversations about their standing in class because I just felt like that was better in person. But not seeing the work in real life is very hard because tell me in the chat, what do you experience when you see work in real life that is the game changer for you? Because especially 3D work, if it's photographed poorly or the lighting is weird or something like that, you can completely misread an artwork. And I've seen photos of sculptures and then seen them in real life and went, whoa, that's not what I thought that piece looked like, for better or for worse. And so that is one thing I miss. I miss going up close to a drawing, really looking at it, seeing the surface, especially 3D work that's large scale, being able to touch things, and sometimes like actually physically helping students. Like I taught a sculpture class where we cast these figure sculptures in plaster. And there were times I had to do like open heart surgery on people's plaster molds because they would like mess something up. And that would happen in printmaking as well, where somebody set the pressure on the press wrong and somebody didn't remember to put down the alcohol to make it right. And that's really like, that's something I will never be able to do in online learning. That said, though, people do need to learn how to photograph the work. And the other argument I have is that when you work professionally as an artist, think about it this way. It is so much more likely when you're a professional artist that somebody will see your work on a screen before they see it in real life, if they ever see it in real life. There are so many artists out there whose work I love that I've never seen in real life. And I may not be able to because their stuff is in London and I'm not going to go to London. And so an argument can also be made that, yes, while it does feel, oh my God, it'd be so much better to see the students drawing in real life, the real world doesn't actually work that way. Like, this is terrible, but even just not even thinking about the pandemic, I did not go to art museums that much because they're expensive. If you go to MoMA in New York City, the last time I was there, it was $35 for an adult. And so if I go with my husband, that's $70. Okay. And then if I go with my 2 kids, It's like over $100 for a half an hour museum visit that my kids are going to complain about because they're tired. And I'm like, I'm not going to drop that kind of money. And so actually, me going to see artwork in real life is not that common. And that's why art school really does have that special appeal of you just see so much work in person and student exhibitions and class. It's really, really phenomenal. San K says, can't do justice with Mark Rothko's work on the internet. You got to experience it, not see it online. That I would agree with. You know something? Because here's the thing. I appreciate abstract work, but it's in general, it's not my like big cup of tea. Okay. But I really do like Rothko's work. And that was definitely cemented by an in-person experience, because the thing about his work that I like a lot is you really feel like you're immersed in that experience. And it is work that you just want to sit down and look at. And there aren't a lot of, like, sometimes I see pieces in the museum, it's like, seen it, leave. It's like, you don't really need to spend time with that. So yeah. Puck says, I tried online drawing sessions, wasn't too bad. Though trying to do crits immediately after was tricky. My dream, you guys, if we ever have the budget to do this, is that after a live draw along, that we go into the Discord and we talk about the work after. We have a voice session. I mean, I would love that. But we need the budget to be able to do something like that, because that costs a lot of money for us to hire staff to make that work. Let's see. Puck says, most museums have their work online, which makes it easier to view and reflect in peace, not with masses of tourists. Oh, yeah. I mean, depending on where you are, when I went to the Louvre, I just gave up on seeing the Mona Lisa. I'm like, forget it. It's just stupid. Plus, Caravaggio's Death of the Virgin is in the same room. It's so good. So I was like, that's fine. I've seen the Mona Lisa. It's okay. I can say I was in the same room with it, but it was such a fiasco that I did not like that a lot. Lisa says, I spent a couple hours at a local museum yesterday after work. You can see texture and depth better. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was at the Norman Rockwell Museum, and I've seen his work a million times. That's not new. But when I went to the museum, I couldn't believe how thick his paint was. I was like, really? I had no idea. And I have to say, I really looked at his work in a different way after that experience. And it's a little museum. Like, it's not a major tourist attraction, but it was one of the best museum experiences that I had. And actually, I have found that is the case. Sometimes if you go to the smaller scale museums, they're not as crowded, and you can find some real gems. I mean, I think when I was in Paris, I definitely liked the Rodin Museum more than the Louvre. Don't get me wrong, the Louvre is amazing. It's so big, though. It just like hurts my head to think about like trying to cover all that space in the Louvre. It was exhausting. And so going to a museum like Norman Rockwell Museum or the Rodin Museum, or if you guys are in Spain, go to the Sorolla Museum. Oh my God, that was a beautiful museum. Or like the Gardner Museum in Boston. They're just like smaller scale museum experiences that I really, really enjoy. So those are really good opportunities for you guys to explore. Art Prof has a podcast that's available on Spotify and also on iTunes. And in a few minutes, I will be hanging out in the Art Prof Discord in the post live streams channel. You should come hang out with us and talk about coffee or whatever. I don't know, probably something more interesting than that. Hopefully you guys will come up with something, I'm sure. Subscribe to our channel so you can continue to grow and develop as an artist. And a big thank you to our top Patreon supporters who are providing the resources we need to keep Art Prof 100% free and accessible to everybody. And thank you to all of you for making this community what it is. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you next time. Bye.